Imagine coming home from a long business trip, only to find subtle clues, an unfamiliar cologne, a misplaced wine glass, a locked phone hidden away. At first, it's just suspicion, until the truth hits like a freight train. Your wife isn't just cheating, she's been lying for years. But what if, instead of confronting her, you turned the tables? What if, instead of heartbreak, you chose revenge? This is the story of a man who didn't just expose the betrayal, he destroyed everyone involved. And trust me, you won't see the ending coming. The key turned in the lock with a quiet click, and Jonathan Pierce stepped into his house, the familiar space feeling strangely foreign. The air was still, the kind of silence that didn't feel natural. His fingers tightened around the handle of his suitcase as he shut the door behind him. Something felt off. It had been a long week, meetings, flights, negotiations that stretched into the early hours. But despite the exhaustion pulling at his limbs, a strange unease settled in his stomach. He hadn't expected a grand welcome home, but the absence of his wife, Isabelle, was unusual. His eyes swept over the pristine living room. Everything was in its place, and yet, there were small inconsistencies, details that his mind latched onto immediately. A throw pillow slightly askew. A half-empty wine glass in the sink. And then, his gaze landed on something that sent a sharp jolt through him, a tie draped over the armchair. Not his. Jonathan picked it up, the silk smooth against his fingers, and lifted it closer. The scent was unfamiliar, an expensive, musky cologne that didn't belong to him. A slow exhale left his lips, steadying himself against the tide of emotions clawing at his chest. He set the tie down carefully, his mind already piecing together fragments of evidence. Walking through the house, he started noticing more things that didn't add up. The faint scent of perfume lingering in the bedroom, slightly different from the one Isabelle usually wore. The slight indentation on the edge of their bed, as if someone had sat there recently. He pulled out his phone, dialing Isabelle's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. And again. Nothing. With a growing sense of urgency, he scrolled through his contacts, calling a few of her closest friends. The responses only deepened his suspicions. Oh, Isabelle? I think she mentioned something about a spa retreat, one friend said, a hesitation in her voice that didn't sit right. Another friend gave a completely different story. She said something about visiting family. Her aunt was sick, I believe. The contradictions were glaring. Jonathan forced himself to keep his voice even, thanking them before ending the calls. His grip on the phone tightened as he stood there, his mind racing. Taking a slow breath, he moved toward Isabelle's vanity, methodically opening drawers, scanning through the carefully arranged contents. Among silk scarves and jewelry, he found it, a small folded receipt, tucked away as if meant to be forgotten. Jonathan unfolded it, his eyes scanning the itemized list. A designer lingerie set. Purchased on the exact day he had left for his trip. His jaw tensed. Before he could dwell on it further, the sound of the doorbell jolted him from his thoughts. He quickly composed himself, shoving the receipt back into the drawer before making his way to the entrance. On the porch stood Mrs. Alden, their elderly neighbor, her expression one of quiet concern. Mr. Pierce, I hope I'm not intruding, she said, wringing her hands. But I thought you should know, there's been an unfamiliar black car parked outside your house several times this week. Always when you were away. A chill spread through him, but he managed a tight smile. Thank you, Mrs. Alden. I appreciate you telling me. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. As soon as he closed the door, the facade crumbled. His entire body tensed as he stormed back through the house, his mind now racing with possibilities he didn't want to consider. He tore through drawers, through Isabelle's study, searching for something, anything, that could confirm what he already knew deep down. And then, in the back of a drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old documents, he found it. A sleek, expensive burner phone. The screen was dark, locked behind a passcode, but the mere existence of it was damning enough. Jonathan turned it over in his hands, staring at his own reflection in the glossy black surface. He barely recognized the expression staring back at him, cold, unreadable, a sharp contrast to the man he had been just a week ago. Without a second thought, he reached for his own phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Ryan," he said when the call connected. "I need your help." No questions asked? The response was immediate. "I'll be there in an hour." Jonathan ended the call and sat down, the burner phone still clutched in his hand. His mind was already working, calculating the next steps. He wasn't just going to uncover the truth. He was going to control it. And when it was all said and done, Isabelle wouldn't even see it coming. Jonathan sat in the dimly lit study, the burner phone resting on the desk in front of him. The soft glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, but his mind was sharper than ever. He had always prided himself on being logical, methodical. A man who made decisions based on reason, not emotion. But tonight, reason was hanging by a thread. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated. Isabelle hadn't just cheated on him, she had crafted an elaborate deception, covering her tracks, feeding him carefully constructed lies. The thought made his jaw tighten. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice. And now, it was his turn to make one. A sharp knock on the front door broke the silence. Right on time. Jonathan moved swiftly, unlocking the door to find Ryan Bishop standing there, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He was the kind of guy who thrived on solving problems most people didn't even know existed. Quiet, unassuming, but dangerously efficient. "That bad?" Ryan asked as he stepped inside, glancing at the burner phone on the desk. Jonathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured them both a drink, the ice clinking against the glass. He handed one to Ryan, then sat down. "I need eyes on everything," Jonathan finally said, his voice steady. "Every room, every entrance. I want to know exactly what happens in this house when I'm not here." Ryan nodded, already pulling out his laptop. "Surveillance it is. We'll go full coverage, hidden cameras, audio feeds. Give me a few hours, and you'll have a live feed of your own house." Jonathan exhaled slowly, running a hand down his face. This wasn't just about catching Isabelle in the act. This was about control. About knowing, without a shadow of a doubt, who she was when she thought no one was watching. While Ryan worked, Jonathan opened his own laptop and began putting the next part of his plan into motion. A fake business trip. He booked flights, a hotel, even set up an automated email response to make it look like he'd be out of the country. When he sent Isabelle a message about his last-minute meeting in London, her reply came almost instantly. "Oh no! That's so sudden. I'll miss you, pensive face, be safe." Jonathan stared at the screen. The emojis, the concern, it was all an act. He could see it now, the forced sweetness in every word. She had been playing him for a fool, and he had let her. Not anymore. By the time Ryan finished setting up the surveillance system, Jonathan had his plan fully formed. He would leave. Give Isabelle the perfect opportunity to do exactly what he knew she was going to do. And he would watch. Not just to confirm his suspicions, but to make sure that when he made his next move, there would be no room for doubt. The next morning, Jonathan kissed Isabelle on the cheek before grabbing his suitcase. He didn't have to fake the coldness in his touch. It was already there. "Call me if you need anything," he said, slipping into his role one last time. She smiled, all warmth and softness, the way she always did when she thought she had him wrapped around her finger. "Of course, love. Don't work too hard." The moment he drove away, his phone buzzed. A notification from his security feed. Isabelle was already on the move. Jonathan checked into a hotel across town, a nondescript place with a view of nothing and a bed that barely looked comfortable. But he wasn't here to sleep. He set up his laptop, connected to the hidden cameras, and settled in. And then, he waited. Hours passed, and Isabelle went about her day as if nothing was wrong. She made herself coffee, scrolled through her phone, took a long bath. Then, just past 9 p.m., The headlights of a black SUV illuminated the driveway. Jonathan leaned forward, his hands tightening into fists. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Elliot Vaughn, his longtime business rival. The man who had undercut him in deals, spread rumors to weaken his position, and now, apparently, had been sleeping with his wife. Jonathan had prepared for a betrayal. He had steeled himself for the truth. But this was war. He watched as Isabelle greeted Elliot at the door, a look of excitement flashing across her face. No hesitation. No guilt. Just eagerness. Jonathan's chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had what he needed. The proof. The undeniable evidence. Now, it was time for payback. And Isabelle? She wouldn't even see it coming. Jonathan sat in the dimly lit hotel room, the glow of his laptop screen casting sharp shadows across his face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but his eyes remained locked on the live feed streaming from his home. Every camera angle, every room, he had a front row seat to his own betrayal. Elliot Vaughn had stepped inside without hesitation, his confidence a gut-wrenching insult. Isabelle greeted him with a smile, the kind Jonathan hadn't seen in years, her body language relaxed, inviting. She poured him a drink, her fingers brushing his as she handed over the glass. It was all so rehearsed. So effortless. Jonathan barely blinked as the two moved through the house, settling in like they owned the place. His place. He took in every movement, every touch, every stolen glance. His grip on the armrest of the chair tightened as he watched Isabelle press herself against Elliot, whispering something in his ear before leading him upstairs. A part of him wanted to look away. But he didn't. Because anger was useful. It burned away the hesitation, the grief, the parts of him that still wanted to understand why. He wasn't here for explanations. He was here for results. Jonathan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to lean back. The next move wasn't about revenge, at least not yet. It was about strategy. He minimized the surveillance feed and pulled up another window. Elliot Vaughn had built his success on one thing: reputation. He was well connected, highly respected, always one step ahead in business negotiations. But Jonathan had spent years watching him, analyzing the cracks beneath that polished surface. And now, he was going to rip them wide open. He opened an encrypted file on his laptop, one he had compiled long before tonight. Vaughn's company, Vaughn Enterprises, wasn't as clean as it appeared. There were whispers of insider trading, quietly buried lawsuits, offshore accounts that didn't quite add up. Nothing provable. Nothing concrete. Until now. Jonathan had no intention of just exposing an affair. That was personal. And personal wasn't enough. He started crafting an email, anonymous, of course, addressed to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Attached were documents, compiled with the kind of precision only someone who truly wanted to ruin another man could gather. Financial discrepancies, forged invoices, transactions that led in circles but ultimately pointed back to Vaughn. Jonathan's smile was cold as he hit send. Destroying Elliot in the business world was only half the plan. The other half? Making sure everyone knew exactly the kind of man he was, especially his wife. Danielle Vaughn. She was everything Elliot pretended to be. Smart. Sharp. And more importantly, loyal. Jonathan had met her at a handful of industry events over the years, always poised, always standing by her husband's side like she believed every word he said. Jonathan wondered how long that belief would last once she saw the photos. He scrolled through the surveillance footage, capturing still images, Isabelle's eager smile, Elliot's hands on her waist, the two of them disappearing into the bedroom. Then, he uploaded them into an email with a simple message. Mrs. Vaughn, I thought you deserved to know the truth. Your husband has been very busy tonight. No threats. No explanations. Just facts. Cold and undeniable. He typed in Danielle's personal email, one he had acquired through sheer patience and quiet observation, and hit send. By the time Jonathan leaned back, stretching his fingers, the first message had already arrived. Danielle Vaughn. Who is this? Where did you get these photos? Jonathan didn't respond. He didn't need to. She would figure it out soon enough. He refreshed his inbox, waiting for the chaos to begin. He imagined Danielle confronting Elliot, throwing accusations, demanding explanations. He pictured Elliot scrambling to contain the situation, realizing far too late that it was already out of his control. Jonathan checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. It wouldn't take long now. And just as he expected, 20 minutes later, the surveillance feed caught something interesting. Elliot's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, then froze. Jonathan smirked as he watched it unfold. Elliot's face twisted into something between confusion and fear. He quickly stood, brushing past Isabelle, muttering something Jonathan couldn't hear. She reached for his arm, but he shook her off, already dialing a number. Danielle, no doubt. Jonathan turned up the volume, listening as Elliot's voice rose. Where did you get these? Who sent them? A pause. A sharp inhale. No, I don't know what you're talking about. Babe, you're overreacting. The sound of a woman yelling on the other end. Then Elliot's face strained of color. Jonathan could only imagine what Danielle was saying, but whatever it was, it had Elliot grabbing his coat and heading for the door. Isabelle followed, confused, trying to stop him. Elliot, what's going on? Elliot didn't answer. He yanked open the front door and stormed outside, leaving Isabelle standing there, stunned, watching his car peel out of the driveway. Jonathan took a slow sip of his drink, savoring the moment. The cracks had formed. The damage was done. And this was only the beginning. Jonathan sat in his hotel room, watching the live feed from his house. The screen displayed Isabelle standing in the doorway, frozen in place as Elliot's car sped away. Confusion and frustration were written all over her face. She had no idea what had just happened, but Jonathan did. Elliot's world was crumbling. His business was now under investigation, his wife had just discovered his affair, and soon, his professional reputation would be in ruins. But Jonathan wasn't done yet. There was still one more person who needed to face the consequences. Isabelle. She had built a life of lies, carefully balancing her deception, thinking she was untouchable. Now, Jonathan was about to strip everything away, her comfort, her security, her future. He opened his laptop and pulled up the remote access controls for his home security system. With a few keystrokes, he changed all the entry codes, the front door, the garage, even the security alarm. Isabelle no longer had access to the house she had so shamelessly defiled. Then, he went into the banking system. The accounts were all in his name. She had always relied on his money. Not anymore. He transferred the joint savings into a private account, leaving just enough for her to realize she had nothing left. Lastly, he canceled her credit cards. Every single one. She would wake up tomorrow with no home, no money, and no way out. Jonathan wasn't just going to leave her penniless, he was going to destroy her reputation too. He opened his email and drafted messages to Isabelle's closest friends, family, and social circle. Each email was simple, professional, and damning. Subject: a personal matter. I wanted to reach out personally to let you know that Isabelle and I are separating. Unfortunately, I recently discovered that she has been engaged in multiple affairs over the past year, including with my business rival, Elliot Vaughn. Given the circumstances, I will be taking legal action. I wanted you to hear the truth from me first. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Best, Jonathan. He sent the emails without hesitation. There would be no coming back from this. Now, the final piece. Jonathan called Isabelle's workplace. He had always been friendly with her boss, Richard Dalton, and knew that Isabelle's position at the company relied heavily on her professional reputation. When Richard answered, Jonathan kept his voice steady. Richard, I need to talk to you about Isabelle. I just found out that she's been using company resources for personal reasons, including arranging secret meetings during work hours. I have proof. A pause. Then a sigh. That's disappointing to hear. We take professional integrity very seriously, Jonathan. I thought you should know before it affects the company's reputation. I'm sure you'll handle it appropriately. Richard didn't need more than that. Jonathan knew Isabelle would be fired within a week. With everything in motion, Jonathan waited. By the next morning, the messages had reached everyone. Isabelle's phone was likely blowing up with calls, from friends, family, colleagues, and her now former boss. And then, when she tried to access her bank account? Nothing. Her card? Declined. Her house? Locked. Her job? Gone. Everything she had depended on for years? Destroyed. That afternoon, Jonathan parked a few houses away from their home, watching from a distance. Then, right on time, she arrived. She tried the front door. Locked. She entered the code. Invalid. Her phone came out, and Jonathan could imagine her trying to call him. He let it ring. And ring. Panic started to set in. She went around to the garage. Locked. Her car keys? No longer linked to the system. She stood there, staring at the house that had once been hers, completely lost. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't him ignoring her. She read the message. Her expression twisted. Another message. And another. Her friends were turning against her. Her colleagues were distancing themselves. She was losing everything. Finally, she sagged against the door, her shoulders shaking. Jonathan watched in silence, his expression unreadable. She had thought she could betray him and walk away unscathed. She had thought she was untouchable. Now, she had nothing. And he wasn't done yet. Jonathan sat behind the wheel of his car, parked just down the street from what was once his home. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the pavement, and the air held a quiet stillness that felt almost poetic. From his vantage point, he could see Isabelle sitting on the front steps, her phone clutched in her hands, her shoulders tense, her fingers gripping at the last remnants of control. She had tried everything. She had called him 8 times. Each one ignored. She had texted, messages filled with desperation, confusion, anger. She had reached out to friends, only to be met with silence. The very people she had once confided in had now turned away, unwilling to associate with her in the wake of the truth. She had checked her accounts, empty. She had gone to work, only to be met with an awkward conversation and an early termination. And now, she had nowhere left to go. Jonathan watched as she dropped her phone into her lap, her head falling into her hands. Her whole body sagged, defeated. The confident, cunning woman who had once manipulated him so effortlessly now sat there, reduced to nothing more than a shell of the person she had tried to be. He didn't feel sorry for her. This was justice. His grip tightened around the steering wheel as he finally reached for his own phone. It was time for the final blow. Step 1. Show her the truth. Jonathan typed a message simple and direct. Check the mailbox. From his seat, he watched as Isabelle's phone lit up. Her head snapped up, eyes scanning the street as if trying to figure out where the message had come from. For a second, she hesitated, but then, curiosity, or maybe desperation, took over. She stood, walking slowly toward the mailbox at the edge of the driveway. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the envelope out and turned it over in her hands. No name. No return address. Just a simple white envelope. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, watching as she tore it open. Inside was a single USB drive. Step 2. Let her watch it all burn. Isabelle disappeared into the house. Jonathan knew what would come next. The hesitation. The growing anxiety. And then, finally, the decision to plug the USB into her laptop. He imagined her face as the files opened, video after video, image after image. The footage from the hidden cameras. Every stolen moment between her and Elliot. Every whisper, every touch, every betrayal. The proof of her lies, playing out in crystal clear resolution before her own eyes. Then the emails. Screenshots of her texts with Elliot. Messages she had deleted, thinking they were gone forever. Conversations where they had laughed about Jonathan's naivety, where she had made plans for a future he was never meant to be a part of. And finally, the legal documents. The signed divorce papers. The financial statements showing she had no legal claim to anything. And of course, the notice of eviction, effective immediately. Jonathan exhaled slowly, picturing the exact moment when realization would hit her. There was no fixing this. No sweet words or manipulations that could undo the damage. She had lost. Step 3. Face to face. After a long silence, the front door opened again. Isabelle stumbled outside, the papers clutched in one hand, her phone in the other. She looked around wildly, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Jonathan stepped out of the car. Her eyes snapped to him instantly. The moment she saw him, she froze. He walked toward her slowly, controlled, his expression unreadable. He could see it now, the realization in her eyes, the sheer weight of everything crashing down on her all at once. Jonathan, she breathed, taking a shaky step forward. I don't understand. Please, just. He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. There's nothing left to say. His voice was calm, steady. You made your choices. Now you live with them. She shook her head, her lips trembling. I never meant for it to. You did, he cut in. You meant for all of it. Silence. Her hands curled into fists, frustration flickering through her expression. You think you're so perfect? Like you never made mistakes? He almost laughed. Mistakes? He gestured toward the house. That wasn't a mistake, Isabelle. That was calculated. Repeated. Intentional. Her jaw clenched, but the fight was leaving her. So that's it? You just ruin my life and walk away? He tilted his head slightly. No, Isabelle. You ruined your life. I just made sure you felt the consequences. She looked away, her chest rising and falling unevenly. Jonathan exhaled, glancing down at his watch. You have until the end of the day to leave. The locks will be changed by morning. Her eyes snapped back to him, pure disbelief written across her face. You're throwing me out? His expression didn't waver. I told you, I don't owe you anything. For the first time, he saw the tears well in her eyes. A last, desperate attempt to manipulate him. But it was too late for that. Jonathan turned without another word and walked back to his car. As he pulled away from the curb, he saw her sink to the ground, shoulders shaking, completely broken. But he didn't stop. Didn't look back. Because he had already won. The next few weeks unfolded exactly as Jonathan had planned. Elliot's business crumbled under the weight of legal scrutiny, his reputation forever tarnished. Danielle Vaughn finalized her divorce, taking with her half of everything Elliot had spent years building. And Isabelle? She disappeared. No one from their old social circle spoke of her anymore. She had no job, no money, no allies. And Jonathan? He moved forward. There was no regret. No lingering bitterness. Just a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had taken back control of his life. Some called it revenge. But to him? It was just justice.